The Refugee Works Initiative, Building Britain Together, written by Peter Lamb for My Listening Library. Prologue. The idea that built a nation. In the middle of the last century, a vast mountain range on the far side of the world echoed with the sound of dynamite, machinery, and ambition. Australia's Snowy Mountains scheme had begun, an audacious project to carve tunnels through granite and turn melting snow into power for a nation that needed renewal. More than 100,000 men and women from 30 nations worked side by side. Many had fled war, dictatorship, or famine. They carried little more than determination, and together they built one of the great engineering feats of the modern world. Their legacy was not only electricity and irrigation, it was the birth of multicultural Australia, a new identity forged through shared work, shared hardship, and shared pride. That story matters to us now because Britain faces a challenge of its own. We are short of workers, short of homes, and short of faith in what we can build together. And yet, people continue to arrive on our shores, seeking safety, purpose, and belonging. What if we invited them, not into hotels, but into history? What if we channeled that same spirit of reconstruction and asked those who come here to help us rebuild the nation they now call home? This is the idea behind the Refugee Works Initiative, a program that transforms asylum from a waiting room into a workshop, turning human potential into public good. It begins with a question. Can Britain once again build greatness out of compassion and courage? Chapter 1. The British Dilemma. Across the United Kingdom, from Dover to Dundee, a quiet contradiction plays out every day. There are jobs that cannot be filled, houses that need building, care homes short of staff. And yet, tens of thousands of people who want to work are forbidden to do so. They live in hotels, disused barracks, and temporary housing. They wait for months, sometimes years, for their asylum claims to be processed. And while they wait, they are barred from earning a living, learning skills, or contributing to the society they hope to join. It is a system built to contain risk, not to release potential. A system that treats human beings as paperwork, not as participants. In 2024, the cost of housing asylum seekers in hotels exceeded £2 billion. At the same time, the construction industry reported a shortfall of 500,000 workers. Health and social care faced chronic vacancies. And the green transition, solar installation, home insulation, flood defence, lacked the labour to meet its targets. In other words, Britain doesn't have a refugee crisis. It has an imagination crisis. We have built an entire narrative around fear and deterrence. We talk about small boats, illegal crossings, and border control. We rarely talk about what comes next, about the people who make it here, and the chance they represent if we choose to see it. Our public conversation stops at the shoreline. But a modern, confident country must ask the harder question. Once they are here, what can we build together? When asked why asylum seekers shouldn't work, officials point to the complexity of background checks, the risk of exploitation, and the fear of undercutting local wages. All valid concerns, but not unsolvable ones. Right now, every asylum seeker in Britain undergoes an initial security screening. From that point, it would be entirely feasible to offer structured, supervised employment within approved public works programs while their claims progress. Instead, we leave them idle. We spend millions feeding and housing people who could be insulating homes, planting trees, repairing railways, and caring for our elderly. We burn money to maintain immobility. And what does that idleness do to the human spirit? It breeds frustration, depression, and stigma. It convinces both refugees and citizens that belonging will never be possible. Britain's post-war generation faced similar crossroads. After 1945, bombed-out cities, rationing, and shortages were the backdrop to renewal. The solution then wasn't isolation, it was mobilization. The nation rebuilt through collective effort, local, immigrant, refugee, and returning soldier alike. Today, we need not bombs or rubble to justify such ambition. We need only recognize that the challenges of our time, climate resilience, housing, energy transition, are national projects that demand national participation. But participation requires permission, and permission begins with vision. If we can move past fear and bureaucracy and allow purpose to replace paralysis, then the question is no longer why refugees should work. It becomes why on earth wouldn't they? Chapter 2. Building Britain Together. The Refugee Works initiative begins with a simple principle. No one benefits from wasted potential. If people arrive in the United Kingdom seeking protection, let them contribute from the moment they are safely screened. Let work become the bridge between fear and belonging. Picture it not as a detention system, but as a national service of renewal, a chance to connect human will with national need. The blueprint is straightforward. Every participant would enter through a regional build hub, a modular site equipped for training, English lessons, and temporary housing. From there, crews would be deployed to projects in their surrounding regions. These build hubs would be scattered across the country, in former barracks near coastal flood zones, in industrial estates near rail upgrade sites, in decommissioned airfields close to new housing developments. Each hub would have classrooms, workshops, childcare, and space for rest, reflection, and community. Supervised by qualified trainers, participants would earn certification in areas Britain urgently needs: construction, electrification, insulation, environmental management, and care. It would be the most practical kind of education, learning by rebuilding the country around you. In Phase 1, new arrivals spend 4 to 6 weeks in training. They learn English through worksite vocabulary, safety procedures, and team communication. They are paid a fair wage from day one. In Phase 2, they join public works projects. Every shift contributes to the visible renewal of a town or community. And in Phase 3, after 18 months of good standing, they earn fast-track review for permanent residency. That's the incentive, belonging through contribution, a ladder of purpose that leads upward, not inward. The initiative would not compete with British workers, it would complement them. Each role would be union-aligned and transparently funded. No one's job would be replaced, only reinforced. Imagine an average morning at a build hub in Yorkshire. The sun hasn't yet risen, but lights glow in the mess hall. Refugees and local supervisors eat together, toast, tea, nervous smiles. Then the buses depart, one group to a solar installation, another to a flood wall reinforcement, a third to a rail maintenance line. By mid-morning, they are wearing the same vests, orange, reflective, each stamped with 3 words: building Britain together. A new kind of visibility begins to form, not of crisis or controversy, but of contribution. Over time, the initiative could be expanded into 5 national missions. Mission 1. Flood defense and coastal protection. Thousands of miles of vulnerable coastlines need repair. Crews could reinforce barriers, plant mangroves, and install drainage channels. Mission 2. Warm homes and green energy. Refugee workers trained in insulation, solar installation, and retrofitting could reduce household energy costs nationwide. Mission 3. Affordable housing builds. Britain needs hundreds of thousands of new homes. Refugee crews could assemble modular units on brownfield land, homes they help build for communities they'll soon join. Mission 4. Transport and infrastructure renewal. Rail electrification, bridge maintenance, and rural road repair are labour-heavy, teachable, and essential. Mission 5. Care and community support. Non-clinical NHS assistance, elder home visits, and logistics roles, work that restores dignity both to the worker and to those they help. Each mission tells a story of shared benefit. Every task produces visible public value. The public begins to see not refugees in hotels, but people rebuilding their neighbourhoods. The tension begins to ease. The narrative begins to shift. From fear to function, from us and them to we built this. It is an initiative as pragmatic as it is moral. It cuts costs, fills gaps, and creates assets. But more than that, it redefines what Britain believes it can be. Chapter 3. Voices of Change. Every great policy begins as an idea, but ideas live or die by the people who experience them. To understand what building Britain together could mean, we need to imagine the voices that would fill its world. Voices of those who work, who watch, and who benefit. Let us start in Kent, near the coast. A man named Rafik stands beside a digger, his hands gripping the steel rail of a newly poured seawall. He came from Aleppo 3 years ago. For 18 months, he waited in a small hotel room, uncertain of his fate. Now he is part of a team reinforcing flood defences that protect British homes. He says softly, "I lost my home to war. I help others keep theirs from the water." It's not a slogan, it's a life reclaimed through purpose. Up north, in Sheffield, a young woman named Ayla trains in an insulation crew. She wears gloves too big for her hands and laughs when the supervisor calls her chief of the staple gun. Her group has just finished their 100th retrofit. Another homemade warmer, another pensioner saving on bills. Isla dreams of becoming an energy auditor. She says, "If Britain is my home, then keeping it warm seems a good place to start." In Bristol, a local site manager named Tom had doubts when the programme began. He worried about communication, safety, and public reaction. 6 months later, he is its most vocal defender. He tells his colleagues, "They show up early, work hard, and they care. It's the first time in years I've seen pride on a site like this." In Manchester, a retired teacher named Margaret meets the refugee crew who repaired her roof. She brings them tea and biscuits every Wednesday. "I can't climb a ladder," she jokes, "but I can still pour a decent cup." She tells her local paper that they didn't take her roof, they gave it back to her. That single sentence changes hearts more effectively than any headline. Across the country, these quiet encounters accumulate. Children wave at orange vests on building sites. Local councils begin to see deadlines met, and communities begin to see new faces, not as intruders, but as allies. Sociologists call it contact theory, the simple fact that prejudice fades when people work together toward a shared goal. That is the social alchemy of the Refugee Works initiative. It turns fear into familiarity, and unfamiliarity into fellowship. And from the government's perspective, it is efficient. Hotel spending plummets. Infrastructure delivery accelerates. Tax revenue rises as workers transition from temporary participants to permanent residents. Economists estimate that if even half of the UK's current asylum population were enrolled in such a scheme, the output could exceed £5 billion in infrastructure value within 3 years. But perhaps the truest value is less tangible. It is the renewal of national confidence, the sense that Britain can still build, still lead, still welcome, without losing itself. Because in truth, this isn't a refugee story. It's a British story about who we are when we stop looking at problems and start looking at possibilities. And when the first projects are complete, the new flood barrier, the warm homes, the revived railway lines, the plaques at each site might carry the same inscription, "Built by Britain and those who chose Britain." Those who chose Britain and were finally chosen in return. Chapter 4. The Britain We Could Choose. Every generation faces a moment when the story of its country can turn. Some nations build walls to mark that moment. Others build something far greater, purpose. Britain has reached such a crossroads. Our infrastructure is aging, our population is shrinking, and our divisions are deep. But at our borders, there is human potential waiting to be unlocked. The question is not whether refugees arrive. The question is whether we make their arrival count, for them and for us. The Refugee Works initiative offers a different national narrative, one that sees asylum not as a pause, but as participation, one that replaces the static image of a hotel corridor with the kinetic image of a construction site, a rail yard, a green field lined with turbines. Imagine turning on the news to see crews in high-vis jackets, their vests emblazoned with 3 words, "Building Britain Together," not as a slogan, but as evidence, real, visible, and useful. We could watch flood walls rise where storms once broke through. We could see homes made warmer, hospitals made safer, and landscapes renewed. And we could know that part of that work came from the hands of those who once sought only refuge. In purely economic terms, the benefits are measurable. In human terms, they are immeasurable. Employment builds tax revenue, purpose builds stability, and stability builds peace. It would also change how the world sees Britain, not as a fortress, but as a forge. Not as a nation that shuts its doors, but one that shapes its destiny through inclusion. We could lead by example, demonstrating that moral responsibility and economic sense are not opposites, but partners in progress. When historians look back on this period, they will note the headlines about small boats, the arguments, the division. But what if, among those records, they also found evidence of innovation, a project that turned arrival into achievement? A Britain that did not retreat into resentment, but reached forward with imagination. It is entirely possible. It only requires one thing, a shift in perception. Instead of seeing refugees as the end of a problem, see them as the beginning of a solution. Instead of holding them in limbo, invite them into labour, learning, and life. Instead of telling them they are lucky to be here, show them that we are lucky to have them. That choice is ours. It always has been. And the kind of Britain we leave behind will depend on which version of the story we decide to tell. Epilogue. The Britain we will build. One day, the last refugee hotel will close its doors. The final breakfast buffet will be cleared away. In its place, somewhere across the country, a ribbon will be cut. Behind that ribbon will stand men and women from every corner of the world. Builders, carers, electricians, and dreamers. They will look up at what they have built. A housing block, a flood barrier, a community centre powered by solar panels. A reporter will ask one of them what this work means. He will smile, wipe dust from his hands and say, "It means I belong." And Britain will be the stronger for it. Not only in walls and roofs and kilowatts, but in spirit. Because the nation that sees value in every willing hand is the nation that never runs out of hope. The Refugee Works Initiative is not just a plan, it is a promise that the next chapter of our story will be written by all of us together. They're not in hotels, they're rebuilding Britain. Written by Peter Lamb for My Listening Library.